Summer 1995. Seoul, South Korea. In the center of this burgeoning boomtown, the upmarket Sampoong Department Store, a symbol of the brash overnight success of one of the fastest growing cities in the world. But on the 29th of June, disaster struck. In less than 30 seconds, all 5 floors of the department store collapsed, one on top of the other. Hundreds were killed, hundreds more injured. But how did it happen? A team of experts was determined to find out, as an angry nation demanded to know what had caused the worst peacetime disaster in their history. In the late 1980s, South Korea boasted one of the most prosperous economies in the world. And in the capital city of Seoul, real estate developers couldn't put buildings up fast enough. The glitzy Sampoong Department Store opened in 1989, right at the peak of the boom. It was the jewel of the massive Sampoong corporate empire. Built in one of Seoul's wealthiest neighborhoods, the store was a monument to opulence. 2 sprawling wings linked by a huge chrome and glass atrium, and wrapped in Italian pink marble. Shoppers were drawn by an unrivaled selection of expensive clothing, furniture and luxury goods. On the top floor, several chic Korean restaurants catered to the big spending business crowd. The Sampoong shopping center was an instant success. For 5.5 years, business was good, very good. On an average day, the department store took in more than $500,000 US. But on the 29th of June 1995, it all came tumbling down, literally. Sung-Hung Park worked in the children's department in the basement of the store. It was her first job straight out of school, and she disliked it from the beginning. She hated being on her feet all day. She remembers the events of the 29th of June vividly. The rooftop air conditioner wasn't working that day, and the store was stifling hot.
Even with the air conditioner off, we all kept working. It was just like any other day. Customers continued shopping and workers kept working. Nothing was different than on any other day.
But there were telltale signs that things were far from normal. Sometime between 8 and 9 in the morning, employees in the Chunwon restaurant noticed some broken tiles. The floor appeared to be buckling. Strange vibrations in the store caused glasses in the homeware department to rattle on the shelf. At 10:30, several staff recalled hearing loud cracks and bangs coming from somewhere in the store. But they shrugged it off. If something was wrong, surely the management would let them know.
I felt nothing special all morning. Then we got notice that there was a crack on the 5th floor. Someone said it would be too dangerous to turn the air conditioner back on.
Then, just before midday, kitchen staff on the 5th floor heard cracking sounds coming from the ceiling. A workmate came to tell Park that there were rumors that the 5th floor would have to be shut down. Park told her friend not to worry. Maybe they'd all get to go home early. Finally, at 2 that afternoon, Sampoong boss Jun Lee met with his executives to discuss the cracks and strange noises. They decided to bring in an expert to take stock of the damage and assess the risks. At 3 o'clock, Hak Soo Lee, a structural engineer, arrived to examine the building. He photographed the cracks in the ceilings of the 4th and 5th stories, as well as the large bulge in the floor of the restaurant kitchen. On the roof, he found even more disturbing evidence. It was cracked from one side to the other, and even crumbling in places. At 4 o'clock, Hak Soo Lee reported back to the store's senior staff. Despite the evidence of imminent danger, he believed the building was still sound. Repairs could be made after hours. He suggested that the cracks be filled and additional support added to the upper floors. Sampoong executives kept the shop open and the staff working. A decision with horrifying consequences. Early evening on the 29th of June 1995, in the bustling city centre of Seoul, South Korea. Usually, this was the busiest time of day for the upmarket Sampoong Department Store. As always, the aisles were crowded with shoppers on their way home from work. At 5:30, they suddenly heard loud noises coming from the 5th floor. Large cracks began to appear around one column where it met the ceiling. At 5:47, an enormous bang was heard on the upper floors. 4 minutes later, the store's alarm went off. The building shuddered, dust fell, and then the lights went out.
From across the store, there was a sound like a subway train entering a station. And when we heard that sound, people started running here and there.
Working at her counter in the children's department, Sung Hung Park tried to remain calm. By the time she realized she had to get out, it was too late.
Suddenly, a piece of concrete dropped on my head, and I was knocked unconscious.
For those watching on the street outside, what happened next was too horrible to contemplate. In less than 30 seconds, all 5 above-ground stories collapsed, one after the other, crushing the 4 basement floors under their weight. At first, there was an eerie silence as the walking wounded emerged dazed from the dust and debris. All of a sudden, it was chaos. Passers-by swarmed over the rubble, doing everything they could to help survivors. With more than 1,000 people inside the store when it collapsed, it was impossible to gauge how many were still trapped, or worse. Within minutes, emergency crews began arriving, amidst a chorus of sirens and shouts. Kyung-wook-an, a rookie firefighter with the Seoul Fire Brigade, was horrified at the grim scene laid out before him.
In one word, it was hell. Made me wonder how this kind of disaster could have happened in a normal society, not under condition of war. I felt futile and so shocked at the gigantic proportion of the disaster.
Members of the emergency response team had never had to cope with a disaster on this scale, or with so many victims. As they treated the injured and filled the waiting ambulances, they could hear the cries of those trapped in the smoking rubble all over the disaster site. The rescuers were in danger too. As they scrambled to find the living among the dead, their attention turned to an exterior wall, still standing, but only just. The site seemed to be fighting them at every turn. The sheer size of it and the massive amount of wreckage was overwhelming. Rescuers tried everything they could, but nothing seemed to work.
Generally speaking, the rescue equipment proved to be ineffective in a large-scale disaster. The rescue equipment consisted of heat detector, sonic detector, equipment that could even detect human breath, search dogs, etc. However, because everything was crumbled and buried underground with over 500 casualties, even the dogs were ineffective. Because the area was large and so chaotic, electronic heat detector was of no use.
Rescue workers used their bare hands to move the concrete and steel debris. Bulldozers and other heavy equipment could be used only sparingly because the weight of the machinery could have crushed any survivors still buried. Several of South Korea's largest construction companies rushed their moving equipment to the scene. Cranes were set up along the periphery so that only their long booms reached over the debris. That way, no extra stress was added to the site.
Even though we used large crane, we were worried about a possibility that there could be some survivors underneath, that they might be crushed. So we lifted all the pieces one by one.
Miraculously, trapped under tons of concrete and twisted metal, 18-year-old shop assistant Sung-Hung Park was alive. Her store uniform was gone, torn off by the force of the air hurtling through the building as it collapsed.
After I awakened, I was completely surrounded by darkness, and all sides around me were closed in. There wasn't any room.
As Park regained consciousness, she tried to figure out where she was and what had happened. Her life had been spared by two massive slabs of concrete that had wedged together during the collapse, creating a tiny pocket.
I cried for help and banged on the steel pipe beside me, but they couldn't hear me from outside.
As the mountain of debris on top of her began to shift and settle, Park came to a horrifying realization. Her tomb was closing in on her.
In the space where I was stuck, I could stretch my arms this much. The space on my side was slightly wider. But soon afterwards, the ceiling started coming down and I could not turn my body around.
At first, she thought that the accident might have been restricted to her department in the basement. Perhaps a wall had toppled over and she'd soon be rescued. Then, Park slowly pieced the day's events together. The cracks and booms that had echoed through the building, the vibrations and shaking shelves, the rumors of fractured floors and columns. At that point, she began to work out what must have happened. The entire department store had collapsed on top of her, and she was trapped under thousands of tons of concrete. As utter panic set in, she cried louder for help, but to no avail. As Park struggled to control her fear, far above her, the search for survivors continued. The day after the disaster, the army was called in. Family members of the missing began camping out at the site. They begged the rescuers to work faster and harder to find their loved ones trapped under the rubble. But the death toll had reached over 200 and was steadily rising. The disaster site was crawling with emergency crews, volunteers, and equipment. But there was another team poring over the wreckage for a different purpose. They were the engineering and architecture experts. under intense pressure to explain what had happened. With all of Korea and much of the world watching, answers were needed, and fast. Was there something hidden in the design of the building that had doomed it to failure? Did the foundations collapse? Were the materials used in its construction too weak? Or was it an act of terrorism, a deadly attack from North Korea? It would take a team of forensic engineers and a full-blown criminal investigation to answer those questions, and eventually find the cause of the worst peacetime disaster in the history of Korea. There was only one cause immediately ruled out by the investigators. Though Korea is generally a stable landmass, it's had 3 major earthquakes since 1978. But a quick check of the seismic charts showed no earthquake activity on the Korean peninsula on the 29th of June 1995. Could it have been a bomb or a deliberate act of terror? Seoul is located just 55 kilometers from the heavily armed border with communist North Korea. 50 years after the Korean War, the two countries are still locked in a military standoff. Could the North have launched a terrorist attack on the most prominent commercial target in Seoul? Investigators combed the site looking for traces of a bomb or the residue from an explosion. But they found nothing. It didn't seem to have been an act of terror. Next, investigators turned their sights to the building's construction. And here, they got their first solid lead. They discovered that the Sampoong Department Store was built on an old landfill site. If the site hadn't been properly cleared, then the foundations would have been resting on shaky ground. Perhaps that's what caused the building to collapse. To find out, investigators needed to drill down through the debris and extract a core sample. Buried far below in her shrinking tomb, Sampoong Park was encouraged by the noise of the machines and the sounds of the rescue effort. She also realized she was not alone.
After some time had passed, I could hear other people crying out for help. I knew almost all of them. They were the voices of my co-workers. So I called out their names to let them know who I was. They must have been hurt very badly, because even though they could hear me, they did not answer me, but cried out for help.
Park could hear her friend who was trapped just a few meters away.
My closest friend from the 3rd floor was talking with me right before the collapse, and she fell alongside me in such a way that there was a concrete slab between us.
Park had completely lost track of time. At that point, she thought only a day, maybe 2, had passed. In reality, she'd been buried for nearly a week. 900 survivors had already been rescued, but the death toll had risen to more than 300. And with each passing day, the search became more and more a grim recovery of bodies. At the edge of the site, the investigators continued their efforts, drilling deep into the department store's foundations. Engineer Hyung-sik Chung and his team needed to extract a core sample from the foundation's footing to determine if the ground structure beneath the building was indeed the cause of the collapse.
There are 2 major reasons for collapse. One is how the structure was constructed, and the other part is the foundation. My responsibility was to find out if the foundation was strong enough to support the building. If the foundation is weak, the building may settle or start sinking.
침하를 하면은 그 침하로 인해서 상부 구조가 손상을 입기 때문에
And if the building settles, the structure will be damaged.
충분히 견뎌야만 침하를 안
A building must have a solid foundation.
The Sampoong Department Store comprised two identical wings connected by a glass atrium. But only one of the wings collapsed. The other half of the building remained standing. Investigators discovered it was the south wing, the one that caved in, that was built over the old landfill site, while the north wing, which stood, was built on solid ground. That seemed to support the theory that it was an unstable foundation that led to the disaster. Dr. Chung and his team examined the core sample from the earth beneath the foundation. Was the Sampoong store built on loose landfill or solid ground?
The structure's foundation was built as it should have been. The core sample shows that its foundation was firmly attached to a layer of bedrock. Furthermore, examination of the basement level of the building revealed that the foundation had survived the collapse relatively intact. The foundation was quite stable.
So, the foundation's footing was not the problem. The landfill had been cleared away as it should have been, and the whole store was built on solid ground, another possible cause eliminated. This led investigators to think that the answer must lie in the building itself. And then, they found an intriguing clue in a section of a concrete wall still standing. Lang Chung was the concrete expert on the investigation team. The moment he'd first heard the news, he'd rushed to the disaster site.
수천 명의 제자를 내보내고 그런 건축 구조를 가르치면서 이런
After having taught structural engineering to several thousand students, I could not help but feel a moral and social responsibility as an expert. So I rushed to the site of the collapse to join the investigation team, trying to explain how this disaster could have happened.
Concrete is the most common building material in the world, with over 6 billion tons produced worldwide each year. Strong, fire-resistant and cheap, made correctly, concrete will endure thousands of years. Its strength is derived from the way all its components bind together.
콘크리트 강도는 이제 거기 안에 포함되어 있는 aggregate.
Concrete is composed of three parts: cement, water, and aggregate.
믹스로 이루어지는데요. 배합이 적정해야.
The combination has to be precise. If there's too much or too little of any one component, then the strength of the concrete would be compromised.
There'd been persistent rumors that the concrete used in the Sampoong Department Store was substandard. So when Lang Chung arrived at the site, he was already suspicious. And he knew just where to look first. The 29th of June 1995, tragedy struck the bustling city centre of Seoul, South Korea. A massive 5-story department store collapsed in the high-end shopping district in the middle of rush hour. At least 900 emerged or were pulled out alive, but hundreds more remained trapped in piles of rubble. 15 days later, rescuers continued to work relentlessly. With over 300 confirmed dead, the toll was still rising. And a survivor hadn't been recovered in more than 3 days. Most South Koreans had given up hope of finding anyone else alive. But deep under the rubble, Sung-Hung Park was desperately clinging to life. She no longer heard any sounds from her friend, trapped just meters away. She feared the worst. Rescue workers had been pumping water into the site to keep the dust down. And some of it trickled down through the rubble to Park. She soaked a scrap of cloth in the puddles to collect as much as she could. Filthy and almost too revolting to drink, it was all that was keeping her alive. Up on the surface of the disaster site, investigators were growing desperate to find the cause of the collapse. They'd already ruled out 3 possible causes. It wasn't an earthquake or a terrorist bomb, and core dirt samples proved the foundation was not at fault. The investigation turned towards the integrity of the building itself. The concrete expert on the team thought he might know where the fault lay.
콘크리트 강도를 외관상으로 파악하기는 매우 어렵습니다.
It's hard to tell the strength of concrete just from its outer appearance. But the first thing you must consider is the color.
풍화된 콘크리트는 색깔이
Eroded concrete has tendency to turn white.
그다음에 표면이
Next, you scratch the surface of the concrete to analyze the grade.
스크래치에 긁히는 정도. 당시에는 굉장히 약해
It
보였어요.
appeared very weak at the time.
그것은
I couldn't be sure since he already received such a forceful impact,
없었지만은 콘크리트가 참
but I thought the concrete might have weakened.
그렇게 생각을 했죠.
Chung and his team collected over 150 samples of concrete from the rubble and took them to an engineering lab to test their strength. A compressor like this is capable of exerting thousands of kilos of pressure. It's the best method for testing the quality of a concrete sample. Concrete must be mixed precisely or it won't hold up. And air bubbles are another common problem. If they're not squeezed out as the concrete sets, it will be honeycombed with air pockets. Either flaw is enough to bring down a building. Is that what happened here?
콘크리트 강도가 의심이 돼서 현장에서 채취한
We had doubts about the strength of the concrete,
압축 강도 테스트를 해본
but the pressure test revealed no problems.
큰 문제가 없는
The
것을
concrete was strong enough.
So, it wasn't poor concrete that destroyed the Sampoong Department Store. Investigators were once again forced to widen their search. By that point, rescuers had put together a list of missing employees and where they were in the store when it collapsed. They'd also created a map of the site that indicated where each of the store's departments lay under the rubble. They hoped the map would lead them to the missing staff. Sung-Hung Park was on their list.
그러다가 이제 나중에 목격자 진술 그다음에 거기에 있던 모든 사람들의
We gather information from the witnesses and survivor as the rescue work continued.
작업을 해서 그 사람들을 일단은 구조하고 그다음에 이제 그 이후는
With that information, we knew where the store's employees had been at the time of the collapse.
직원들의 위치는 어느 정도 파악이 되지만
By that point, nobody believed that any more survivors would be pulled from the rubble. But fireman Kong Wook-an never gave up.
생존자는 항상 있다. 있다고 가정을 해.
If you convince yourself there are no more survivors, you cannot work as a rescuer.
작업을 못 해. 작업을 못 해.
So right up to the last moment, I never lost hope that some people might be alive.
On day 17, Arn's patience and optimism were rewarded. Over the noise of the cranes and jackhammers, he heard a faint sound. He immediately ordered the machines silenced and dropped to his knees to listen. He heard a voice, Park, calling for help.
콘크리트 더미를 하나 제꼈어요. 제끼니까 이래
When I lifted a piece of concrete, I heard something.
뭐 있다. 이 사람이 그 처참한 그
It was overwhelming to hear a live human voice among so many dead bodies.
사람의 목소리 들으면 이게 몇 병 갑니다.
This was a live person,
살아있는 사람이다. 그래서 그것부터 이제
so I lifted some stones and crawled in.
캄캄하죠.
It was pitch dark. But when I turned my head towards the direction of the voice, Park's face was right there. We were face to face.
They asked if there was a person alive down there. So I answered yes. Then they started digging with their bare hands, and they started to pull me out. I told them I have no clothes on. They said not to worry, and they pulled me out and wrapped me in a blanket.
Word quickly spread around the site. Someone had been found alive. Park was astonished to hear she'd been buried for 17 days. She thought only 4 or maybe 5 days had gone by. A misconception that may have saved her life. Not knowing the truth allowed her to preserve precious energy and stay calm through her ordeal. She was badly dehydrated, but miraculously, she'd suffered no major injuries.
After the rescue workers touched my hand, I felt I'm alive. I'm going to be okay.
Park's incredible story of survival captivated all of South Korea. But sadly, she was the last person to be pulled alive from the rubble. The final death toll reached 501. The public and the media demanded answers, and the pressure on investigators grew daily. Then, one of the team made a shocking discovery. A dark secret buried deep inside the building's original blueprints. In the late 1980s, Seoul was a boomtown. Buildings sprang up everywhere, fueled by an insatiable demand for urban space. Modern equipment and innovation in design meant that construction could be faster and structures higher than ever before. Stories abound of corners cut, unsafe work sites and shoddy materials. All over the world, high-rises are here to stay, but much rides on the skill and integrity of the people who build them. The Sampoong Department Store was what's called a flat slab structure, currently the most popular design in the world. Because they're made entirely from poured concrete, flat slab buildings are cheap and they go up fast. Thick concrete slabs form the floors, supported by concrete walls and columns that transfer the weight of the building down to the foundations. Flat slab is an excellent method of construction, but it's notoriously sensitive.
네, 플랫 슬랩 빌딩은 다른 빌딩처럼 안전하고 강합니다.
The flat slab system is as strong as any other,
있는 게 다른 구조물보다도
but it requires more precise planning than other structures.
정밀 시공이 뒷받침돼야 돼요. 다른 구조하고 다릅니다.
And there's no margin for error.
슬라브 구조의 특성이라고 볼 수 있어요.
That means if just one column fails, the building fails, catastrophically. London, 1968. A woman lighting her cooker caused a small gas explosion, damaging a structural support in her block of flats. An entire wing of the 23-story building collapsed. 4 people died. Bridgeport, Connecticut, 1987. A 16-story flat slab building collapsed while still under construction, killing 28 workers. The worst construction accident in US history. The flat slab design explained why the Sampoong Department Store had collapsed so completely. Once it starts, it'll drop like a house of cards. But it did not explain what triggered the collapse. Chul-chung was the architect on the investigation team. When he examined the store's original blueprints, he found a building with dirty secrets and a troubled history. The construction company originally hired to build the Sampoong Department Store weren't allowed to finish the job. Shortly after the foundations were poured, the Sampoong Store executives asked for drastic modifications to the design. The engineers warned them of the grave dangers in making wholesale changes to a flat slab building. The company boss, Jun Lee, responded by sacking the builders and replacing them with his own construction company. The Sampoong Construction Company ignored the dangers and went ahead with the radically altered design plans. Chae-chul Chung discovered that most of the crucial changes were made on the 5th floor.
This is where the main alterations of the design were made. The 5th floor was initially designed as a roller skating rink, but it was changed to a Korean restaurant. And this led to a 3-fold increase in the weight of the floor.
The roller rink was included in the design to satisfy a local bylaw that restricted total retail space in department stores. But the work on the rink never even started. Once the design was approved by authorities, Sampoong Store executives abandoned the original plans and instead built restaurants on the 5th floor. A huge mistake. In traditional Korean restaurants, diners sit on a floor heated by hot water pipes. But those pipes require a lot of extra space. In the case of the Sampoong Department Store, it meant increasing the thickness of the 5th floor by 30 centimeters with an additional layer of concrete. Each restaurant also installed several enormous kitchen appliances. None of this extra weight was ever factored into the structural calculations. To make matters worse, investigators learned of another major refit on the roof of the building. Massive water cooling towers had been moved from the ground onto the roof after neighbors complained of noise. Once filled with water, the cooling towers weighed about 30 tons. Clearly, the massive increases in weight on the upper floors would have required extra support. But instead, the new builders did exactly the opposite. Moon-gon Lee also contributed to the investigation of the collapse. As a structural engineer, he knows what it takes to bring down a 5-story building. This is the Nanjido landfill, the graveyard for the mountain of rubble that was once the Sampoong Department Store.
슬래스라브에서 중요한 부분이
In the case of the flat slab system, the connection area between the column and the slab is very, very critical because the columns directly distribute the load. That's why we concentrated on that area.
Lee knows that the story of a building's collapse can often be found in its bones, in this case, rubble. When he measured the wrecked columns and floor slabs and compared them with the blueprints, Lee found plenty of discrepancies.
We eventually found that some columns were missing the drop panels between the slab and the column, and the drop panel is essential in a flat slab structure.
Drop panels should go on top of the columns to help distribute the weight of the concrete slab floors. But Moon-gon Lee found that many panels were too small, and some were never installed at all. And there were darker secrets buried in the rubble. The support columns themselves were grossly undersized. They were supposed to be 80 centimeters in circumference. In fact, they were much smaller. So at least 2 deadly forces were at play. A dramatic increase in the weight of the top floor, coupled with a drastic reduction in the structural support. A lethal combination. When Chae-chul Chung looked at the blueprints for the Sampoong Department Store, he saw a disaster waiting to happen. He believes the building was in a state of failure from the day it was completed. But how had it managed to stay standing for more than 5 years? And what was the final straw that brought it tumbling down? When investigators turned their attention towards one of the support columns from the 4th floor, they came across an astonishing blunder, the final piece of the puzzle. Ironically, it was the installation of a safety feature that had finally brought the building to the ground. Regulations in Seoul required department stores to put a fire shield around escalators. In the event of a fire, it automatically closes to prevent flames and smoke from spreading between the floors. To make room for the fire shield, workers had to cut into the concrete columns next to the escalator. In total, they'd removed 25% of one of the building's critical supports. The last in a long list of reckless changes. Structural engineers have a name for the phenomenon that brought down the Sampoong Department Store in the center of Seoul, South Korea. It's called punch shear, the lethal result of too much weight sitting on columns too skinny to carry it. Punch shear is like a finger pushing through a wet tissue. The undersized columns in the building were poised to poke through the ceilings above. And on the afternoon of June the 29th, 1995, they did just that. By the time Sung-Hung Park started her shift that day, the Sampoong Department Store had already begun its collapse. Even before the store opened, security guards had reported hearing loud cracking noises in the night. And then there was the bulging of the floor tiles in the Chunwon restaurant. Employees had reported that as early as 8 in the morning. In retrospect, that was the first sign that the crucial column on the 4th floor next to the escalator, the one that had been cut into, had begun to punch shear through the floor above. Then, between 11:30 and midday, store employees remember hearing a series of loud bangs coming from the 4th and 5th floors. It was at that point that Sung-Hung Park hoped the store might close early so she could go home. Finally, at 2 in the afternoon, Sampoong Chief Executive Jun Lee called an emergency meeting with his managers. Their decision: to bring in a structural engineer to assess the damage. Between 2 and 3, store employees were ordered to drain the water from the cooling towers on the roof to reduce the load. But it was too little, too late. The building had already reached an irreversible state of collapse. By that point, a huge crack had opened up between the 4th floor column and the ceiling, and the concrete slab had dropped another 10 centimeters. At 3:10, structural engineer Hak-soo Lee was still taking photographs of the 4th and 5th floors, as well as the bulge in the restaurant floor. At 4 o'clock, he presented his findings to the Sampoong executives. Despite the warning signs, he told them that there was no imminent danger and that the problems could be patched up after the store closed. Hak-soo Lee later admitted that he downplayed the potential risks to avoid worrying Sampoong President Jun Lee. By 5 that evening, the store was busy with shoppers on their way home from work. 1:30, everyone in the store heard a loud booming sound coming from the 5th floor. Employees were ordered to shut off the gas lines running to the restaurants. At 6:15, another enormous bang echoed through the building. The 4th floor column had just punched completely through the ceiling, and in an instant, its load was shifted onto the remaining pillars. But they were all too small, and the extra weight was far too much. By the time the store's alarm sounded at 5:52, the building was already tumbling down. In less than 30 seconds, all 5 floors above the ground and the 4 basement levels collapsed on top of each other. The Sampoong Department Store literally disappeared, disintegrating into a cloud of dust and debris. In their final report, investigators blamed the collapse of the Sampoong Department Store on the alterations made during the construction of the building. Company officials were found guilty of negligence and greed. Sampoong CEO Jun Lee was convicted of criminal negligence and sentenced to a 10-year jail term.
If they were to build a building for themselves to live in, they wouldn't have built it so carelessly and poorly. If people were to construct buildings with the spirit and attitude that they were building their own homes, I don't think there would be another disaster like the Sampoong collapse.
The tragedy of the Sampoong Department Store was a product of a series of mistakes and a blatant disregard for engineering practices and procedures. The clock started ticking on the time bomb the day Sampoong CEO Jun Lee fired the original construction company and then forged ahead with major structural changes to the building. He gambled that his building would stand tall, and for more than 5 years, the Sampoong Department Store beat the odds. But in the end, 501 people paid the ultimate price. He'd gambled with their lives.